Good day, everyone. I am Mr. Muggsy, your narrator for the day. Today we will be reading Replacements, Chapters 1 and 2, a Rimworld story. If you would like to follow along with how the chapters of this book get written, please join me Mondays and Wednesdays for Rimworld gameplay. Friday will be a quick discussion as to what is going into the actual chapters that will be read every Sunday. Thank you so much to those who support the channel. And now, for your listening pleasure. The starport of Hollis Prime buzzed with activity. A chaotic symphony of boots on metal walkways, barked orders, and the low hum of idling engines. Caden Voss gripped his worn duffel bag so tightly his fingers ached, the strap digging into his palm like an anchor to steady his nerves. Around him, fresh recruits said their goodbyes, some tearful, others hopeful, before shuffling toward the shuttles. Groups of childhood friends whispered excitedly to mask their fears, while Caden stood alone. The absence of his own friends who had shipped out yesterday, sharp in the back of his mind. His gaze drifted toward the twin suns sinking into the horizon, their golden light painting the surrounding fields in hues of amber and rust. The height of the autumn harvest, he thought, and his chest tightened. His father and brothers would be out there, toiling without him. A familiar throat clearing broke his thoughts. One of the twins, barely 14, grinned at him knowingly. Caden forced a smile. "I'll send Pei home as soon as I can," he muttered, his voice firmer than he expected. He wanted to say more, to explain, to apologize, but the words lodged in his throat. "We'll manage, Kay," his father said gruffly. The old man's weathered features softened briefly before he added, "But if you quit, don't bother coming back." The words hit harder than Caden expected, but he nodded. His father's tone was as sharp as ever, discipline honed from years as a planetary militia captain. But there was something else in his eyes. Concern. Pride. It was enough, whatever it was. Caden snapped off a crisp salute, turned, and strode toward the shuttle. Lingering would only make it harder. The shuttle stood gleaming in the fading light, its angular hull marked with the call sign Lucky Sevens, and 3 crowned 7s on the tail fins, reminding Caden more of a fighter craft than a transport. "Never thought I'd see something like this up close," a voice said behind him, drawing his attention to a lithe young man with scars across his chestnut-colored cheeks. "What, a shuttle?" Caden asked. "No!" another young man said, his voice tinged with awe. "That's a meerkat! Marine Corps assault transport. Thing can level a building in seconds, and drop troops before the dust settles." Caden let out a low whistle, eyeing the massive autocannons on its wings, and the stubby Gatling turrets beneath. "Looks more like a Lucy Wasp than a desert ferret," he muttered. The lithe man chuckled. "Better a wasp than a scrat." He extended his hand. "Eric Jaren, Caden Voss," he replied, shaking it. "Hunterfolk?" "Yeah," Eric said, gesturing to his scars and trophies. "Elders said it was time to see what's beyond the woods. Marines seem like the best bet." He hesitated. "But I've got a bad feeling about all this. The recruiter didn't mention any formal training to me. You?" Caden shrugged. "I grew up on militia drills and farm work. I guess they seem to think it's good enough for strength and marksmanship." Eric laughed, spreading his arms wide. "Right, and adding a strong, sly hunter to the Corps without training is good enough, too," he said, his wiry frame almost comical in contrast to the boast. The laugh was cut short, however, by a sudden crash. Eric jerked back, grabbing his arm, startled, as a corporal tried to rush past, sprawling onto the ground with a clatter. The man groaned as glass crunched beneath him, and berry mead pooled on the ground from his shattered contents in his pack. "Lifey! Was that the good stuff?" came a shout from the shuttle ramp. "You know better. How's the kid gonna pay you back now?" "Shut up, Grinner!" the corporal snapped, staggering to his feet, his boots leaving sticky prints on the ramp. Laughs rippled through the line as Grinner, a battle-worn Marine with a lopsided grin, sauntered into view. He pointed to Eric. "Kid, your name's gonna have to be cheap wine now. Better buy life you drink someday. Something good." Eric's face scrunched in irritation before he sighed and muttered, "Fine. Moonshine strong enough to strip paint." The tension dissolved into soft laughter, and Caden shook his head, following Eric and the rest of the recruits into the shuttle. Inside, Caden was directed to the last seat across from Grinner. He stowed his gear carefully and sank into the harness, his thoughts drifting. What would this life make of him? He'd always been strong, of course, broad-shouldered, sun-bronzed, with hands calloused from years of hard labor. But strength alone wouldn't be enough, would it? "Hey, Ginger!" Grinner's voice broke through the hum of the engines and Caden's thoughts. "You got a sister?" Caden raised an eyebrow but didn't take the bait. "You like Ginger? I'll dig up a root for you." His tone was dry, deflecting the jab. "Where are you from?" Grinner's grin stretched wider, mischief dancing in his eyes. "Ice World. Terraformed by Tinkers. Or maybe it was that pack of angry VidTube clowns hopped up on their own ass fumes." He leaned back, the grin fading slightly as his voice dropped. "It doesn't matter. Core's home now. Same for you, kid." Grinner's gaze slowly looked down the shuttle's length. Caden followed it out of curiosity. Yellow lights glowed softly above the head of each of his fellow recruits. His stomach churned as he spotted the yellow light glowing above his own seat. Glancing across to the opposite side, he saw 6 green lights marking seats occupied by battle-hardened Marines. Scars etched their faces, fatigue singed and patched. One soldier even bristling with fresh bionics. "What's yellow mean?" Caden asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Grinner's grin faltered, replaced by a seriousness that made him look older. "Replacement," he said simply. The single word struck like a punch to the gut. Caden's mind reeled as the recruiter's words echoed bitterly. "Infield training is all you need, kid. You're strong, young, and plenty of years ahead of you. You even come pre-trained. Exactly what the Corps is looking for. All the advanced training is better taught in the field anyway. You'll make sergeant in a year just by looking at you, maybe even sooner." Before he could process it further, Grinner tilted his head toward the boarding ramp. "Eyes front, Ginger. Riggs is here." The boarding ramp sealed with a heavy hiss, and Riggs stepped into the shuttle, commanding attention without a word. He was a hulking figure, every inch of him radiating authority, his broad shoulders straining against the seams of his fatigues, his sharp steeled gaze sweeping over them, examining them like new, unused tools. "Outsiders once," Riggs began, his voice a low growl that cut through the hum of the engines. "All of you with yellow lights. Your replacements. Cannon fodder. Nothing more." The words landed like blows, and Caden felt their weight settle on him, as if the seat itself had grown heavier. Around him, he could see others shifting uncomfortably, their faces pale or flushed with panic. Riggs, seemingly immune to their reactions, continued, his tone as sharp as a blade. "When the real recruits, the ones worth training, catch up, you'll be sent off to fill the gaps in other squads. Unless..." He let the word hang in the air, pacing down the line of recruits, his boots striking the deck with rhythmic precision. "You prove yourselves worth staying here. One of the replacements, a wiry young man with a nervous edge to his voice, couldn't hold back. Sir, how do we do that? Riggs paused mid-stride, his expression shifting into something almost resembling amusement. Good question, he said, his tone begrudgingly filled with approval. You follow orders, keep your heads on a swivel, and trust my Marines. He motioned to 6 Marines with green lights. They've survived hell so far. Learn from them, or don't, and end up as a name on my reports. Now we've little time and much to do. Your briefing starts now. He tapped a control panel near the cockpit door, and a holographic projection flickered to life, showing a beige planet rotating slowly. The surface was pockmarked with scars of conflict, red lights blinking in active conflict areas, and lists of high-value targets began to populate. This is Loro, Riggs said, his voice hard again. The Sultanate here sold their planet to the URF in exchange for protection and membership. Problem is, they managed to keep their slaving rights. Locals and their slaves did not take too kindly to that. They've rebelled, called in pirates, and worse, some unknown third party that's stirring up a whole damn mess. The projection zoomed in, highlighting cities, strongholds, and pockets of rebellion. With a few taps, Sergeant Riggs zoomed the projection in, highlighting cities, strongholds, and pockets of rebellion. His eyes flicked to a replacement scribbling furiously on a small notepad. Bookworm, Riggs barked, his voice slicing through the young man's concentration. Listen, don't write. Summary of your orders will hit your armor's HUD when we're on the Resolute. Save your ink for letters home. The recruit flushed a deep red and quickly shoved the notepad into his bag. Sorry, sir, he stammered, sitting rigid in his seat. Riggs let the silence settle, the growing whine of the shuttle's engines filling the void. He gave a curt nod, his sharp gaze sweeping over the recruits one final time. When we hit Loro's orbit, we're dropping in hot, straight into an enemy stronghold. Lucky Sevens here will flatten their defenses on the first sweep and drop us on the pullout. After that, it's on us. Their base will belong to Squad 7 by the time we're done. That's our staging point for further operations, and every squad in this regiment is getting their own. The recruits absorbed the mission details in varying states of dread and determination. Riggs swapped the display to another tactical projection. Pirates are the worst of the scum we'll be facing. Their tactics are basic, but effective. Atmospheric entry, bombard out of defenses, and pod drop raiders. What's the counter-tactic, sir? Caden's question slipped out before he realized he'd spoken, his curiosity getting the better of him. A few heads turned, but Riggs's narrow-eyed glare locked onto him. 4-man insertion vehicles, Riggs said, tapping the console. The display shifted into a schematic of bullet-shaped pods. MIVs, precision troop insertion vehicles that also reduce hull integrity of the pirate ship. You aim and time the drop right, or you and 3 others end up splattered, stranded, or worse. The recruits' expressions darkened as the gravity of the situation sank in. Riggs continued, his voice unrelenting. Once you're inside, expect tight corridors in enemy territory. Pirates love traps and ambush spots, holes to blast you through if you're not careful. Replacements will take point. You want to live? Listen to my Marines. Pirates have piss-poor aim, but they'll make up for it with a hellstorm of lead. Cover, accurate fire, and watching each other's backs will save your lives. His gaze swept the recruits again, lingering just long enough to make each of them squirm. Any more questions? No one spoke up. Riggs let the silence hang a moment longer, his expression unyielding. Good. On the Resolute, for the month of transit, your training will be non-stop. I've got to get you all whipped into shape. Riggs took the time to let thoughts settle as he lowered his seat off the wall. Settle in and keep your voices low. Hope none of you ate. He chuckled darkly, strapping himself into his seat, pulling his cap low over his eyes. Within seconds, he looked like a statue carved from iron, unmoving. Caden leaned forward toward Grinner. Are we really that disposable to the URF? Oh, absolutely, Grinner replied, his grin fading into something harder. I know that feeling. Like Sarge said, stick with us. He won't admit it, but he's always stuck with replacements. You'll get gear that's a generation old, doesn't fit, barely works, but the faster you prove yourself, the better your chances of survival. Caden frowned. What about other squads? With the commander? Grinner let out a bitter chuckle. What? You think they care about you? Not all of them, but enough do. Commanders push replacements first up the trench. It's like a damn tradition. Some sergeants won't even look at you unless you screw up, and a few might shoot you if you don't follow orders. But you got lucky, Ginger. I have a name. Didn't ask, Ginger. Survive the mission, get a few bodies under your belt, then I'll ask. Then I'll care. Caden slumped back in his seat, his confidence crumbling. Every decision that had brought him here felt like a mistake. He rubbed his temples, trying to stave off an oncoming headache. All the training you need is in the field. Bastard recruiters. Grinner's laugh rang out, sharp and loud, turning heads across the shuttle. Riggs didn't even lift his cap. Grinner! Something funny you'd like to share? Clearing his throat, Grinner stifled another chuckle. Sarge, recruiters are still using the same damn line. They can't even get new material. He looked around at each other recruit. I bet they even said, farm work and hunting, you'll be a natural Marine. His laugh started again, and this time, the recruits' flushed faces only seemed to fuel him. Don't worry, boys. We've all been there. You're in good company here. Another veteran sitting near Grinner spoke up, his voice dry. Ignore the clown. He's just glad to say nothing's changed since the last batch. How long ago was that? One of the replacements asked hesitantly. 5 missions back, the veteran said. Our squads get the best turnaround of replacements to veterans on the Resolute. Maybe the whole Corps. Don't badmouth the other squads, Clank, Riggs said, his tone almost amused. Right, sir, Clank replied with a sheepish shrug. Anyway, our last mission didn't go so smooth. Lucky Sevens got shot down by some dirt mole with a stiff upper lip. Pilot made it out. I lost a leg and an arm, and most of the others got banged up pretty bad. Though, a lot died. Sarge here walked away with a shiny new robot heart, thanks to Lifey. Why do they call you Lifey? Us Life, the medic grumbled from his seat, his perpetual scowl deepening. Squad medic, keep you breathing whether you like it or not. Did you finish the mission? Clank nodded. First time we had to call in reinforcements, but yeah, we got it done. Lucky Sevens got rebuilt, and so did we. A lot to live up to, Eric muttered solemnly. We'll be fine, kid, Clank said with a soft smile. Shuttle's AI sharp, and our pilot's even sharper. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Usually. As if on cue, a red light flickered to life above the cockpit door. All right, mudboots, came the pilot's voice, calm and methodical, almost angelic. Our bird's sick of this hay smell. Time to get you out and washed. We're heading home. Life's voice cut through the cabin as the engines roared to life. Anyone not listen to the recruiter and eat before boarding? One sheepish replacement raised their hand. Right. Barf bags under your seat, Life said, shaking his head. Chapter 2. A month of travel blurred into a grueling routine for Squad 7. Daily sessions of punishing physical training, marksman drills, squad movement exercises, and relentless heat exposure filled every waking moment. For the replacements, fresh from Hollis Prime, the desperation of the URF's rapid expansion left little room for proper training. If the Federation weren't so eager to cement its influence, Riggs thought bitterly, these kids might have a chance of becoming proper Marines. Still, progress was progress, and the squad was inching closer to operational readiness. Not perfect, but better than they'd been. The added burden of training replacements from other squads grated on Riggs, though. The other sergeants seemed only too eager to offload their replacements, leaving him to mold the raw recruits into something functional. He bore it without complaint. If they failed in the field, it wouldn't be from lack of preparation or training on his part. But reports from Loro painted a bleaker picture with each passing day. Colonel Isla's latest briefing had sent a ripple of unease through the officer's staff. Battle plans would be shifting the moment they hit orbit. No one could say for certain what to expect. The mysterious third faction, a wild card in an already chaotic situation, was wielding powers that defied understanding. Ancient magic, the colonel had called it. The planet itself was changing, but to what extent? They wouldn't know until the moment they were boots down in the thick of it. Riggs clenched his jaw at the thought. 14 replacements under his command, many barely more than 18, and a mission clouded in uncertainty. He wasn't counting on miracles, but by the stars, he'd take one if it came. Glancing at his watch, Riggs keyed the pad on his wrist. "This is our last week. Heat exposure is now constant. Get used to it," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the sweltering training deck. A few groans escaped the recruits as the temperature climbed to a blistering 135 degrees Fahrenheit. 30 minutes remained in their morning run. Canteens would need refilling soon. But he knew the harsh conditions were necessary. Better they struggled here than planetside. "Riggs!" Closing his eyes with a sigh, Riggs turned to face the source of the booming voice. Sergeant Numbles. The corpulent Marine waddled toward him, his flushed face glistening with sweat, looking like a ripe tomato. Riggs suppressed the urge to groan. "Sergeant Numbles," he said evenly, "what are you here to complain about now?" "This blasted heat is intolerable. I demand you turn it off while my squad and I are here," Numbles huffed, his voice thick and wet, like he was speaking through a mouthful of syrup. Riggs raised an eyebrow. "6 of your squad are already under my training, Numbles. If you don't like how I run things, feel free to leave. Go put your feet up." "My men are artillery, not front lines. They don't need this nonsense." As Numbles spoke, a glob of phlegm launched from his mouth, splattering onto Riggs's chest. The sergeant stepped back with a smug grin, as if he'd achieved some small, disgusting victory. Expressionless, Riggs pulled a tissue from his pocket and wiped the mess away. Then, he calmly increased the temperature another 10 degrees. "Maybe, if you sweated a little more, you'd make a better Marine. Eh, Numbles? It's only going to get hotter." "You bastard!" Numbles wheezed, his breathing now labored. "Squad 3, we're done here. Replacements, stay." He turned on his heel, waddling away while he muttered a string of curses under his breath. Riggs exhaled in relief and dialed the temperature back down. To his surprise, none of the replacements had stopped their run, despite their eyes wandering in his direction. Impressed, he raised his voice. "Water break. Refill your canteens, but don't let me catch you sitting down." "Sir!" the recruits chorused, moving swiftly to obey. The bridge of the Battlecruiser Resolute thrummed with controlled chaos. The steady hum of machinery was punctuated by clipped voices reporting from various stations. Captain Rhys Castaigne stood at his command station, hands clasped behind his back, watching the stars slip past the ship. The faint blue glow of hyperspace reflected off the polished insignia on his crisp uniform, lending him an almost ethereal presence amidst the flurry of activity. Voices overlapped around him, feeding updates into the air. 3 pirate frigates are moving to intercept position. Command suspects a traitor. All Meerkats are loaded and ready to deploy. The first report drew Castaigne's attention. His sharp gaze flicked to the tactical display before him, the holographic projections pulsing with urgency. Pirate positions, defensive grids, and potential deployment zones sprang to life in vivid shades of red, blue, and green. A traitor aboard his ship. The thought gnawed at him, not because it was entirely unexpected, but because of the timing. The Resolute was a fortress, and yet someone had slipped through its defenses, undermining the trust that bound its crew. Castaigne's jaw tightened for a moment, the only outward sign of irritation. Calm waters breed complacency, he said, the old saying echoing in his mind and slipping past his lips. Gunner crews standing by for orders. Engineering teams ready for contingency protocols. Repair crews stationed and waiting. Castaigne's gaze sharpened as his mind began piecing together potential new moves. If the pirates thought they had the upper hand, they'd soon learn otherwise. He shifted slightly, his presence commanding despite his stillness. Bring up a full scan of the intercept route, Castaigne said, his tone measured. I want all known anomalies and potential ambush vectors highlighted. Gunnery, prepare firing solutions for maximum area denial. Engineering, double-check reactor efficiency. If this turns into a chase, I want the Resolute to set the pace and run them down, and establish contact with Colonel Isla. I want them ready to deploy on my mark. Advise their Meerkat pilots for a dead engine drop out of the bay. We'll provide drone and flat cover, if it comes to it. The bridge crew snapped to their tasks, their crisp acknowledgments a symphony of professionalism. Castaigne returned his focus to the tactical display, his mind already considering contingency after contingency. A voice rang out from navigation. Captain, disengaging hyperdrive in 10 minutes. Castaigne nodded, his expression hardening. All 4 cannons, be ready to fire. Spinal laser, begin charging and standing by. He turned to the comms officer. Call a code red. I want everyone at battle stations. We're going into this, ready for anything. The ship's lighting dimmed, replaced by the faint crimson glow of battle readiness. Klaxons echoed faintly through the deck as the announcement cracked through the comms. Code red. All personnel to battle stations. Repeat. Code red. The bridge hummed with focused energy as the crew moved with precision. Outside the viewport, the swirling blue of hyperspace gave no hint of the chaos waiting on the other side. Castaigne stood firm, his gaze steady on the tactical display before him. For him, the coming battle wasn't just a test of strategy. It was a reminder of why the Resolute bore its name. Life filled the Resolute's hangar, a vast hold buzzing with activity. The hum of engines mingled with the murmur of Marines preparing for deployment. Rows of Meerkats stood ready on their drop pads, their angular hulls gleaming under the fluorescent glow of overhead lights. Each bay door loomed like a hungering maw waiting to swallow the transports into the void. To the pilots, it felt that way too. Nearby, clusters of pilots surrounded a massive holodisplay, their faces tight with focus as they discussed descent patterns and risk assessments for the upcoming dead engine drop suggested by Captain Castaigne. It wasn't their first time taking on a high-risk maneuver, but even their steeled nerves weren't immune to the tension. One errant shot could end them before they even hit the atmosphere. In the center of the hangar, Colonel Isla conferred with his officer staff. holograms flashing as plans were made and revised in real time. The sudden appearance of 3 pirate frigates had thrown everything into chaos. Around him, Marines helped replacements adjust their mismatched gear. Their steady hands felt like those of an older sibling, easing the visible worry of the Hollis Prime recruits. The replacements fidgeted with their ill-fitting armor, some questioning its usefulness outright. One unlucky replacement had a poorly welded plate of steel attached to their chest piece. Replacements, Caden Voss muttered from atop a supply crate. Eric Cheapwine Jaren glanced up briefly from his weapon before snapping the last piece into place. The sharp clicks of his marksman rifle muffled by the noise in the hangar. "Nice rifle," Caden said, eyeing it with a hint of envy. "Suppose they figured you'd actually hit something with it." Eric chuckled, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. "Perks of being a hunter, I guess. Sergeant Riggs trusts me not to waste the ammo." Caden sighed, staring down at his own standard-issue rifle. "Back on Hollis, I thought I was a decent shot. Now I feel like dead weight." His doubts rose unbidden, threatening to undo weeks of confidence he'd tried to build. Eric smirked and gave him a light punch to the arm. "Could be worse. Remember Chucky from Squad 3? A whole month in training, and he didn't land a single hit." Caden laughed hard enough to draw glances. Lowering his voice, he grinned. "He was trying, right?" "Trying?" Eric said with mock gravity. "But the broadside of a barn would have been safe with him around." Their laughter was cut short by the sound of boots on metal. Sergeant Riggs strode toward them, his jaw tight. "Squad 7. Looks like we've got a pair of clowns in our midst." His tone carried a hint of amusement. The squad immediately stood at attention, forming a loose circle around Riggs. "Voss," he said, locking eyes with Caden. "What's got you and Jaren giggling like school kids?" Caden glanced over at the countdown timer, its final seconds ticking away. Straightening his shoulders, he replied, "Sir, we were talking about Cheapwine earning the company's trust with his marksmanship, how I felt like dead weight despite my scores, and how Squad 3's broadside couldn't hit the broadside of a barn." Laughter rippled through the group. Even Riggs allowed a small smirk. "True enough. Broadside's got a new job with the artillery crew. Good thing, too. Heard he's on target there." The squad softly cheered amongst themselves, morale lifted just slightly. "All right, gear up," Riggs said. "We're hitting the meerkats. It'll be bumpy." A sudden violent jolt rocked the hangar as the Resolute exited hyperspace. Explosions erupted along the forward shields, sending ripples of kinetic energy through the deck. Standard naval fare, until a shot pierced the ship's belly, tearing through the hangar. The impact was catastrophic. Squad 10, 14, and half of 15 vanished in an instant, consumed in a fiery blast. The rupture in the hull turned the hangar into a vacuum, dragging equipment, debris, and unfortunate Marines toward the void. Atmospheric protections activated swiftly, sealing the breach, but not before it claimed one final victim. A group of replacements scrambled to pull their sergeant back inside, but the shields tore him in half before they could save him. The screams of panic echoed faintly, mingling with the blaring alarms. Then the ship-wide comms cracked to life. "Marines, I'm lighting your way. Get to the pods. We're not failing this mission." Captain Castaigne's voice was calm, but its authority was unmistakable. Colonel Isla didn't miss a beat. "You heard him, Marines. Follow the green lights to the drop pods. Move!" Caden didn't hesitate. Grabbing his gear and sprinting with the others, the hangar was in chaos, but the mission was clear. Throwing himself hard into the cramped confines of the drop pod, Caden tugged the straps tight across his chest and legs, his fingers fumbling slightly as adrenaline surged through him. The interior lights bathed the space in harsh red, casting jagged shadows across the panels, the metal walls pressing close like a steel coffin. The pod's HUD flickered to life, the AI's calm voice breaking through the chaos outside. Trajectory locked. Awaiting lunch. "Just let me make it down," Caden muttered, gripping his rifle across his lap. A sudden jolt slammed him back against his seat as the pod shot into the void. Through the narrow viewport, he watched as the Resolute released wave after wave of pods, each one streaking toward the planet below like fiery comets. Beyond them, the battlecruiser traded fire with the pirate frigates, its forward cannons flaring as the spinal laser charged. The HUD pinged, marking targets as a brilliant beam of energy lanced from the Resolute, striking the central frigate. The ship erupted in a cascading explosion, its fractured hull spinning away in pieces. Caden exhaled briefly, awed, before flak fire and drone swarms dragged his attention back to the reality of the battlefield. Pods around him streaked downward, but not all made it. Through the viewport, he saw one clipped by a pirate's machine gun fire, the impact igniting it in a brief ball of flame. Another pod swerved wildly, caught in the blast wave as debris from the destroyed pod struck its hull. It spiraled out of control before disappearing into the smoke-choked horizon. Caden's stomach churned, a mix of fear and helplessness clawing at him. The HUD beeped again, and a wave of relief washed over him as a familiar signal appeared. Sergeant Riggs, Squad 7. The icon glowed steadily, joined by 6 others, 2 marked as URF researchers. Their pods angled together, locking onto a single destination. An abandoned Sultanate base, deep in enemy-held territory. The comms cracked to life as Riggs came through. "Good enough place for a foothold. Stay your complaints. We've work to do." Caden tightened his grip on his rifle as the retros fired, jolting the pod violently back. The impact slammed through him like a punch, the hatch blowing open a second later. He shot out into the harsh light of Loro's sun, the dry heat stealing his breath, its air reeking of scorched metal and burning sand. Plumes rose from the rebel strongholds on the horizon. Behind him, other pods slammed into the ground, kicking up plumes of dust and debris. Caden's HUD blinked as 4 more signals appeared. Cheap wine, Grinner, Life, and T-Nat. Relief tempered his nerves as he saw the other members of Squad 7 closing in. The last to arrive was Riggs with both URF researchers. What purpose would they serve here, he wondered. Caden glanced around at the battered remains of Squad 7 as they gathered. The thought gnawed at him. Did all of Squad 7 make it? The question weighed heavy, but there was no time to dwell on it. Pods continued streaking through the sky, fiery trails of hope and doom. How many would land safely? How many would be captured or lost? None of it mattered now. Survival was all that counted. "Move!" Riggs barked. "Base is just over that dune. Stay close and stay sharp. Geeks in the middle." Caden adjusted his rifle, falling in line with the others as the squad tightened their formation. 2 younger women, clutching their datapads to their chests like lifelines, moved quickly to the center without a word. The squad instinctively formed a protective circle around them, rifles trained outward, scanning the horizon for threats. The hot wind whipped up stinging grains of sand as they moved, but no one faltered. The terrain ahead was rough, the rising dune obscuring what lay beyond. But there was no hesitation in their steps. Their mission was just beginning. Thank you, everybody, for joining me in today's episode. I had a blast writing and recording it. It was a whole lot of fun for me. Already, though, listening to it and reading it aloud multiple times just to get each section right. There's a ton of rewrites I already know I'll be doing, so I'm excited for that. Leave your comments down below. I would love to read them, both good and critical. And thank you for coming by. And if you wish to support the channel, there's a Patreon. Thank you very much to my Patreon subscribers. You can support by becoming a channel member here on YouTube. And you can always support for free, liking, subscribing, and sharing with those you think might enjoy the content as well. Once again, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I will see you Monday, Wednesday for the actual gameplay of Rimworld to progress the story that we have going on with this book. See you then.